All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Monday, December 13th of 2021. Given that it is a Monday, we've got, of course, some fun things to do on stream here today. We've got our weekly Max Challenge winners and giveaways to do here. We've got, obviously, our open Q&A, typical office hours kind of thing. So should have a pretty fun stream in front of us today. I hope you guys all had a great weekend, maybe a profitable weekend. Was quite an interesting NFL Sunday slate. I would say if you play in a way that is a bit more contrarian in general, I think you probably had a pretty good day. Seemed like there was a lot of chalk that busted, at least to me, over the weekend. I thought I was headed for an awful Sunday after the early games. Was definitely not looking so good, and then turned it around a bit in the afternoon games, and then ended up coming out okay. Went from probably what felt like could have been a full donation day to probably winning back about 75% of my entry fees. So could have been a lot worse, but hope you guys all had a good Sunday here and a good weekend overall. So anyway, let's get into it. First thing to do here, weekly Max Challenge, as I mentioned. It is now, what are we doing this for? This is week 14, so getting to the end of the regular season here. I know most of you guys know what is going on. If by chance you haven't heard of this, we've been giving away prizes all NFL season. I know since we probably maybe have some people watching here now that are subscribed through RunPure or other partners. I will preface this by saying this is unfortunately only available to direct SaberSim subscribers because a lot of the prizes are SaberSim credit. But anyway, all you really need to do is wear a SaberSim logo as your avatar on DraftKings or FanDuel, max out the mini max or the pooch punt on FanDuel for the NFL Sunday main slate. Email Andy at SaberSim.com, a screenshot showing your logo and that you maxed the right contests, and then you're eligible for prizes. So highest scorer wins some goodies every week. If you bink, we did have a winner Bink a couple weeks ago, so that was pretty cool. There's some extra special prizes for Binks in these contests, and then also we're spinning our trusty wheel of names every week for free tickets in the following week's contest. So a lot of fun overall. Week 14, let's go ahead and get into it here and announce our winners. So let me pull this up here. Second overall, second place in the DraftKings Mini Max. So quite a score. Seemed like there was a bit of a sweat for a first place finish overall for a while, but second overall goes to Seminole FS. So congratulations, Seminole FS. You'll win two tickets to a $50 and a $27 single entry contest, free month of SaberSim, and you have now a ticket into the private $5,000 free roll at the end of the season. So I know we are getting close on that. More details to come on that. But congratulations, Seminole FS. Second place, I saw you posted in the NFL chat as well on Sunday. So awesome to see there. And on FanDuel, we did have SaberSim Ross finish in 12th overall on the FanDuel Pooch Punt. So that was the highest overall scoring SaberSim avatar. He also had second place there in 313th place. So congratulations, Ross, on a good day overall. But of course, these prizes are not for the members of the SaberSim team here. So the highest scoring SaberSim user here on the FanDuel side in 452nd place was Pippin Ain't Easy. So congratulations, Pippin Ain't Easy. We will get you, in this case, $25 SaberSim credit, along with a free month of SaberSim and an entry to the private $1,000 free roll we're doing on the FanDuel side at the end of the season. So congratulations again to Seminole FS and Pippin Ain't Easy. Cool. So next up, we've got our giveaways. So just in case you missed it, we will pull 3 winners on the DraftKings side and 10 winners on the FanDuel side that are playing for free tickets for next week's contest. So 150 tickets to the DraftKings Minimax for next week. And on the FanDuel side, it's $7.50 of SaberSim credit to pay for your Pooch Punt tickets for next week. So let's go ahead and get into this here. We'll do DraftKings first. Let me make sure. All right, cool. So we have exactly 50 even on DraftKings this week. So we'll pop them in here. And 3 spins of the magic wheel for our winners for this week. First winner is Kelvin Dubs. Congratulations, Kelvin. And winner number 2 is JT Construct here. Congratulations, JT Construct. Here, I'll click shuffle here real quick. There we go. We'll shuffle them up. Someone had mentioned that they didn't like that it was alphabetical, and it doesn't really matter in the name of randomizing it here. But I suppose it makes it a little bit more exciting to see if your name is going to get pulled up if it isn't shuffled alphabetically. So, or if it isn't listed alphabetically. So maybe the shuffle's a little better there. And our third winner on the DraftKings side this week is Enlo Jr. Congratulations, Enlo Jr. So our 3 winners this week, Kev Collin. Oh, not Kev Collin. I read that right here. Whoops. Sorry, Kev Collin. Bit of a anticlimax there. Kelvin Dubs, JT Construct, and Enlo Jr. Congratulations, guys. And of course, another congratulations to Seminole FS, our highest scorer on the DraftKings side this week. And now let's jump over to the FanDuel side. So on the FanDuel side, 55 names for this week. Clear that out. Oops. And we'll do this one 10 times. So pretty good shot at winning the $7.50 of SaberSim credit here. Let's go ahead. We'll randomize this again as well so that it's not alphabetical exactly. And let's do it. Our first winner, Canopticopter, our only Bink winner of the weekly max challenge so far this season. Winner number 2. Is Snack King 123. Congratulations, Snack King. See some excitement here in chat from Cody. Congratulations again, Cody. 9-car pile up here. Congratulations. Colts 941. Congratulations, Colts 941. Winner number 5 here is CP Hustler. Winner number 6, right on the edge, is Cusplove. Winner number 7. Oh, it's close. Rum Runners takes it down. Spot number 7. We've got 3 more here for week 14 of the weekly max challenge. And it's Moose 2016 in the 8th spot. And our penultimate spin here is Enlo Jr. with the double dip. Winning tickets on both the DraftKings and the FanDuel side for this week. Congratulations again, Enlo Jr. And our last winner for this week here. Oh, it's close. S1 Lopes. Congratulations, S1 Lopes. Our 10 winners on the FanDuel side, I'll go ahead and copy these over. As always, you'll get an email from me or Andy before the end of the day, letting you know that you won, letting you know when to expect your prizes and so on. And congratulations to all of our winners here again this week. We've got 4 more weeks of this year, 15, 16, 17, 18. So it's going quick. NFL season always seems to just completely pass us by pretty quickly, but 4 more weeks of the weekly max challenge. For now, we'll go ahead and transition here into normal office hours. Open Q&A. If you've got questions for me, pop them into the YouTube chat. Pop them into the office hours channel in Slack. I'll answer questions in roughly the order they come in here. So Mondays typically are a little busy on these streams here. Don't have too many questions, all things considered, in my queue, but we've got probably 4 or 5 things to talk through. I see a couple questions in YouTube chat already. So if you have something to ask, get it into the chat now because these streams go quick. But let's go ahead and get things started here. Cool. Let's get it started here. I actually see there were some questions that came in over the weekend. So I'm going to jump back here to a few questions that came in over the weekend here because I missed these. Here. It looks like there's quite a bit of a follow-up conversation that spawned off this original question here. So I'm going to have to read that and catch up there because I missed that there. But this all started with an original question here from Ryan saying, will we ever be able to build off the percentages versus average? And you actually used to be able to do this, and we removed it because it was probably building worse lineups, or at the very least was just confusing, right? The one thing that's kind of important to remember here is that the way that lineups are built with SaberSim is unique, right? Like when you hit the app and you see the projections, you see these are average projections, right? This is merely a way of visually representing on average how good of a player is that night or how many points that player scores that night, but isn't actually literally ever used in actually building your lineups unless your sim variance is set to 0. It is just a single number representation of the full range of outcomes of the player in the game simulations. But when we actually build lineups, what happens is we'll take random buckets of each game simulation, right? Take the projections that those players scored in that set of sims and then build the best lineup around it. So this number doesn't end up mattering, and it wouldn't really matter even that much if you had adjusted it, right, to a percentile. That number would get shifted. We would shift the player's range of outcomes to that new number, but we would still be sampling the player's range of outcomes when we build each lineup. All of this to say is that we naturally take into account players' upside conditions by sampling their range of outcomes randomly in the way that we do when we use sim variance. You don't need to use a 85th percentile projection to build lineups with upside in the app, right? And in fact, when you shift a player's mean to their 85th percentile outcome or something like that, and then proceed to sample that distribution in the same way when you're building lineups, it was causing problems, which is why we removed it. What you can do here is after you've built lineups, you can sort this and say, show me the lineups that are the best 20 out of my pool of 500 when the projection for each player is adjusted to their 85th percentile outcome, right? That's what happens here on step 3. And since it doesn't affect the lineup construction process, it isn't as disruptive. So that's the best way I would recommend using the percentiles now here, and why they are no longer on step 1. Looks like there is an interesting conversation that has kind of spawned off from that. So I'd recommend, if you're interested in that, to go read that in the office hours channel in Slack. Looks like it started with a comment from Shady, which I completely agree with. He said, I highly recommend you don't build lineups from a non-central distribution point. It defeats the points of using SaberSim at all. Playing with the ranking post build might make sense based on your process, which is what happens when you sort by 85th percentile. But shifting the distributions pre-build will just give you junk. Anyway, I agree with that. And that's why it's no longer an option there, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? When you shift a player's mean projection, their average outcome, to what is actually their 85th percentile outcome before the build, the range of outcomes you end up sampling using sim variance ends up not making any sense. It's not representative of the real range of outcomes of a player. So it was removed. But good question there. And now let's go ahead and get into this. And there's also some good conversation here as well. But there was a question here from the Phantom One. And I know there are a couple users in our community here that go by Phantom in some way or the other. So this is the Phantom One. He said, maybe a topic for office hours. I'm trying to understand if I'm a profitable player that hasn't cashed yet or if I'm just donating. This data is my NFL DraftKings performance from weeks 2 through 14 while using SaberSim. I think I'm putting decent shots on goal. Is it just a matter of time before I get a big win, or am I subpar player that should move on? And let me see if I can pull this up here. And we'll pull this data up. Let's see. Let me try to do it like this. Hang on one second. I want to get this up on my screen here. So, all right. Oh. All right, we're back. Cool. We'll just pull up like this. All right, here's the data, right? So this is what we're looking at. So first of all, it's great that you're collecting this, you're tracking this, right? This is what we talk about all the time. Instead of focusing too much on results, tracking your progress in some kind of way that can indicate whether or not you're a profitable player. And one of my favorite ways to do that is the top 1% equity, right? So what we see here in this particular case is the Phantom One is putting 1.28% of his lineups in the top 1%, which is outpacing the top 1% equity, right? An average player would put 1% of their lineups in the top 1%. For that reason alone, I would say that it probably looks like you're running bad here a little bit. I don't think a negative 29% ROI is very in line with a 1.3% equity in the top 1%, personally. But with all that said, this is a pretty small sample size. And one of the things that is very difficult about NFL in general is that if you've just got, it sounds like weeks 2 through 14 here is your sample size. So you're literally talking about 13 points. Really, none of this information is actually too helpful in really determining if you're a profitable player long-term, because you're talking about 13 weeks of data. I would be interested to hear what contests you were playing and how many entries you were playing into these overall. Right. One thing you can do to smooth out your variance a little bit overall is making sure you're playing as many entries as possible in the lowest stakes contests that fit our contest selection principles. If you were playing 20 entries, right, into the $3.20 max every single week or something like that, you might be able to smooth out your risk a little bit more by taking that same $60 and entering it into lower stakes contests and getting more entries in play. It is difficult with just this and only 13 weeks of data to know necessarily. But I would say this is probably at the very least encouraging overall. And I think you are probably running worse than your actual quality of your lineups would indicate based on how often they're placing into the top 1%. This 0.1% is a much higher variance position for a lineup to finish in, but I would say you're also grading out pretty well there. And that I think at the very least, your lineups are likely to regress to a mean there that is probably more profitable than where you have been so far. I think there's some run bad here going on. So, but the most important thing, and I think, oh wait, yeah, cool. Let's see. Let me go ahead and get the browser window back up, so I'm not broadcasting my entire computer here. The most important thing, and I think Ben and Chris and a few other folks mentioned it here. Let's see, where is this originally posted? Yeah, Ben summarized this really well in the NFL channel, and said that the best advice to give here at this particular point would be continuing to track your results and continuing to look at things through this particular like critical lens. The fact that you're looking at this kind of thing and collecting the data, I think, is already such a great step in your ability to continue to improve, that I would recommend, continuing to track those results and think about this critically in this way. But again, from my personal take, with the limited data set that we have here, I think I would expect some regression to the mean here over time. But good question. Cool. Let's keep it going. All right. All right, cool. I see some other questions coming in live on the Office Hours channel. I'm going to jump and hit the questions that came in through YouTube chat here first. This is from M. Jackson. He said, is it always best to use the filter that correlates with my contest, or can I use, for example, a 50K entrance filter for a 300 entry contest? Is that advisable? Well, it's interesting here. First of all, let me go back here and get the average projections here. So the sliders are optimized for the contest that you are playing. Right. So if you are playing a small field single entry contest of 300 people, for example, right, you are going to see sliders that, based on our back testing, are optimized for that particular contest. Right. In this case, for NBA on a 9-game slate, relatively low correlation, low variance, almost no ownership fade. Right. Basically building a little bit more variation, a little bit more variant versions of cash lineups for this kind of contest, for example. Right. If you bump this up to what would be like 150 max over 50K, you're getting a different story. You're getting pretty high variance lineups that start to take into account ownership fade, that also start to prioritize a bit more correlation. If you were just asking what are the best sliders for the contest I'm playing, then I would always recommend playing the ones that are actually selected and designed for the contest you're playing. Right. In a nutshell, or without any other context, these are going to be better sliders for this contest than the 50K sliders. However, if you have some reason for it, if there was something in your process that made you want to get some additional ownership fade or want to get additional variance in your lineups, it is okay to change the sliders. The reason manual mode exists is so that you can change the sliders. And this is always a tricky question to answer because I want to say this in the right way. The sliders, all other things being equal, if you have no reason to change them or move them around, you should use the defaults for your contest. But if you have a reason, something about your particular process that leads you to bumping or increasing ownership fade or sim variance or correlation or any of these things, then feel empowered to do that. So, but the reason we typically recommend you just in general leave these alone is because we've built thousands of lineups for individual contests, and we've done most of the back testing that's required here to see where the optimal levels are. So, but anyway, cool. 6 said, SaberSim saved my slate. Might just become an Opto Bro rest of season. Yeah, I honestly, I'll tell you this. Even if you work more like a hand builder, right? Like if that resonates more with you of just playing a couple lineups and having some guys that are really your guys and really dialing into each individual lineup, one thing that I think can be such a dramatic improvement, such a dramatic step over purely hand building is hand picking your lineups. So if you like to hand build, if you just say, I'm going to play one to three lineups most slates, and I want to kind of build them myself, you can still leverage SaberSim to help you do that in a way that is very powerful, right? Set the sliders to something that resembles the contest you're going to play, build some lineups, right? And hand pick your lineup as opposed to hand building your lineup. I think the biggest thing I see people that are mostly hand building frequently mistake, or the mistake I see people that are hand building do most frequently is sacrifice a ton of average projection without realizing it, right? They'll hand build themselves into a lineup that is actually so contrarian and so leveraged against the field that it would be better used in a contest like a 150 max top heavy contest, right? And in reality, you probably don't even have to do that. So what you can do with SaberSim here is you can build some lineups that are appropriate for the contest that you say you're playing, right? Single entry, 1,000 to 10,000 people. We've got 500 here. We don't even need to look at all these. And then go into our pool and hand pick our lineups, knowing that these are all already optimized for the contest. And maybe you're opinionated about a certain player being in here, right? Instead of saying, okay, the first player that I know for a fact I'm playing in my lineups tonight is I'm just going to enter him in and then start building the lineup from here, right? Instead, take it from the standpoint of that I'm going to lock that player in, right? Or here, let's filter. Let's do filters instead. There you go. Okay. So now I'm filtering by lineups like you're all in on Giannis, right? So now I'm going to go through and pick here, right? You can kind of let SaberSim build your lineup along slowly, even if you're more of a hand builder, and make sure you know that you're building a lineup that's optimized for the contest. So, but anyway. Cool. Okay. Let's see. Jack said, hi, Jordan. My original lineups for NBA on Friday would have placed second in large field GPP FanDuel. Since I late swapped on Friday, I finished 1,200. What is a good rule of thumb for late swapping? That, first of all, is not, you are going to go crazy if you judge your process based on that. That is pure variance. There's very little meaningful that can be drawn from that. In the lineup, let me put it this way. The lineup that finished 1,200 might have, and in fact, probably, since you late swapped it, had a higher expected value than the lineup that would have actually finished second had we played this slate out 1,000 times. Because that lineup that you late swapped presumably had more information and had maybe an overall higher upside than the original lineup, right? I think you can drive yourself crazy being this individually results focused on a single slate like that. In general, what is a good rule of thumb for late swapping? What I typically like to do is I keep an eye out for when the Sims run, right? For an NBA slate, for example, keeping an eye on this timestamp, keeping an eye on the lineup alerts channel in Slack to see when Sims run. And then I use that combined with Basketball Monsters player news tab to just get a sense of how significant the information is that's causing these Sims to run, right? If a Sim runs and there is literally no news on this Basketball Monsters page, sometimes I won't swap and I'll just leave things alone. That's mostly even just laziness. In general, though, anytime Sims run, and especially if there's news, a player starting that wasn't expected to start, a player that's gotten ruled out, you always want to late swap because, first of all, especially in a sport like NBA, that has a huge impact on the projections, right? Because players are normally distributed, right? Players are more likely than pretty much any other sport to have an outcome that is around their mean projection. And the field late swaps so rarely and so suboptimally that you get a huge edge by doing it. So I would, in general, almost always err on the side of late swapping. So this can happen. There's a lot of natural variance there. But just as in the same way that the lineup that finishes first in any given contest on any given night is not necessarily the highest expected value lineup in the contest, nor is it necessarily true that you made your lineup worse by late swapping, even though this sucks and I definitely know how that feels. This is why we can't be super results focused unless we want to completely go crazy. So, but anyway here. LJ said, I dumped that bucket this weekend. Thumbs down. Used too much of my intuition on exposures. Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the wrong thing either. I talk a lot about how on step 3, since you're playing with a pool of lineups that are optimized for the contest, that I think it's a little bit okay to use some sense of intuition to make some decisions in your lineups in step 3. Having one single bad weekend on a random NFL Sunday is not necessarily a sign that your process was wrong either, or even how you were thinking through the slate. Which is why, speaking kind of qualitatively, one of the things I always like to do is, if it's pure intuition, it is what it is. But if you had some sense of an argument of why you were doing the things you were doing, check to see if like the reasons you were thinking through certain things were sound, right? I played a ton of Josh Jacobs this weekend, and did that really work out? No, not really. But he had how many targets? Like 6, 7, 8 something targets. If that game stayed a little bit closer, it's obvious he would have had an enormous role in that game. He had a pretty big role, even given the game script that we got there, right? That's something where, did it work out? No, but I can kind of piece through and figure out that it made sense. I also played a lot of Jermar Jefferson, which in retrospect might not have been the best overall play, knowing that he was sick all week, sat out from practice, and even though he was active with no injury designation going into the weekend, I don't know, maybe that one wasn't as sharp. So if the more you can track these things against, even if you're not, even for like, even qualitatively, track if the reason or why was your intuition telling you to go that direction, and was that right, as opposed to how many fantasy points that player scored. So yeah, I mean, Josh said that Jermar Jefferson got touches when Swift was active, but with Swift inactive, Craig Reynolds got all the work. NFL is weird. I mean, some of it is just the NFL is weird, right? He also said probably my worst DFS week on the year. Yeah, it was a weird week, and a lot of chalk completely busted. So it was a bit of a strange week, but the more you can focus on, was the process right, as opposed to were the results in my favor, the better, even though that sometimes is hard to separate. But Joseph says, how would you utilize review mode to analyze your performance? I want to ensure that most of my top scoring lineups in the pool are dialed into my final total lineups. Yeah, good question. I mean, one of my favorite things to use review mode for is to kind of get a little bit of a wider view of like what could have been. Because even if you're playing 150 lineups, that's such like a limited sample of what was actually available to you on this slate. So one of the things here, I'll just show you what I mean. One of the things I like to do is I will just go back here. Let's reset everything here. Actually, maybe we'll just use this because this would be kind of interesting. We have a build that we ran last week, I think. Let's see what this is. Yeah, let's do this. So we have 500 lineups here. Maybe this was a set of lineups that we used for a 20 max, right? 20 lineups is not very many if you had only played 20 lineups. If you had a 2% equity, if you had 2% top 1% equity in your lineups, right? Your expectation wouldn't even have been having a single lineup in the top 1% of your contest for this given week, right? But with 500 lineups, right, we might have had an expectation of having 10 lineups in the top 1%. One of the things that I think can be kind of interesting to look at here is to just go and look at the actual score of these lineups and see what your highest scoring lineups were. How many lineups did you actually have of your pool of 500, a much bigger sample in this set here? And look, right? And maybe the top 1% line was 175 points, right? The top 1% of lineups in your contest scored 175 points or more. Well, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lineups there, right? Which actually would have outpaced the expectation of 5 lineups in the top 1%, right? And even if none of your 20 got there, you built a pool of lineups that actually outpaced expectation. And maybe you kind of actually just ended up having some bad variance on the lineups that actually ended up in your top 20, right? That's one thing that I like to do. The review mode toggle, to be completely honest, so what the review mode toggle does and what it's different from the actual score sort is it locks in your top 20, right? It locks in the actual 20 you played and then sorts by actual score. So you can see what the actual score of your top lineup was. I don't actually personally use this that much because it is basically the exact same as looking at your individual lineups on the DraftKings app, right? I mean, you could just go in. If these were literally the 20 lineups you actually played, you could just go in and look at them on DraftKings. I do think the actual score sort is pretty cool. And I do like to use it just to see, especially if you have a really bad week, like, was I just off? Were the projections kind of off? Was my approach wrong and I just had a bad week, or did I have some bad variance in terms of what lineups I actually ended up selecting for? So that's probably, I think, a little bit more interesting than the review mode toggle, because I think the review mode toggle mostly at the end of the day just gives you the same information you get by looking at the app. I would say if you make a habit of this over the course of a season or so, right? One thing that can be interesting is if you consistently are seeing that you are building, for a pool of 500, right? If you're consistently seeing that your pool of lineups, the highest sorting by actual score, that you are having more than 1% of those lineups in the top 1%, and you're not realizing that in your actual lineups you end up playing, it is possible that your exposure adjustments you're making in step 3 are actually degrading the quality of lineups that you are playing with, right? Or vice versa, if you are making a bunch of changes in step 1 and you're finding that in step 3 your entire pool of lineups is pacing under its expectation of average performance, it's possible that some of the changes you're making in step 1 are actually degrading the quality of their lineups. So you can kind of figure out maybe where some inefficiencies are in your process just by seeing not only in the actual lineups you enter in the contest, what is my top 1% equity, but also within the pool of the lineups that you built yourself, what is your top 1% equity? So but that's probably the most interesting ways I use it. Again, I haven't used I don't use review mode all too much. So this seems like a follow-up here from Nacho Man. Will we have a way when comparing actual score versus Saber score to see the different ranks? For example, Saber score will have the rank as 1, but actual score rank might be 150, but will always show 1. Gotcha. Yeah, I see what you mean. So when you change the sort, the rank also changes. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that can be nice, you don't know the actual rank, but you can at least in relative terms compare the Saber score and see that like this lineup is a 94.3, knowing that the top lineup overall is the number 1. Yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of annoying. It's a good point. I'll bring that up. Like, it would be nice to know that this was actually my, I don't know. I guess that's a good point because I can't even intuitively necessarily tell what my 94 Saber score lineup is. Maybe it's number 200-ish, something like that is our highest scoring lineup, but it's hard to say. So yeah, good point. Cool. Brandon said, check my DMs. This was on my list actually here. So we'll go ahead and jump into this here. So this is from, I guess, Brandon or TMB in Slack, and said, could you do another 100 slate spreadsheet for an average player who gets 1.5% or 1.5 or 2 lineups in the top 1% with winning 50% back of entry fees every slate? Just to put it in perspective for us average or below average players, how many slates or years we have to be profitable playing this way. Original video is for someone who gets 3 lineups in the top 1%, which isn't most players. If not, could you talk about it a little? Yeah, so I'll talk about this first. So what this is referencing, first of all, is a segment we did on an old Office Hours stream. It's all the way down here at the bottom of the YouTube page if you're interested in watching it. What does variance after 100 slates look like for a winning player? 15-minute little video. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it already, because I think it will set some good expectations of how often you should, based on all the same stuff we're always talking about here, right? Top 1% equity and things like that, how long it actually takes to realize your edge, and also how variant your profitability can be even over 100 slate sample, right? So going back to this example here from the start of the day with the Phantom, we have 13 weeks of a sample, right? Well, this video will show you just how much variance there is even for 100 samples, but it all came from this original kind of spreadsheet here. And what TMB basically is saying is, what happens if we're assuming we're a worse overall player, right? For this original one, I assumed that we put 3 lineups in the top 1% for every 150 lineups we played, which would basically be a 2% top 1% equity, which is very good, right? If we remove one of these lineups completely, right? It's simply just going to take us even, it breaks the spreadsheet, of course. So I guess I'll talk about it instead of demoing it. If we remove one of the lineups, right, if we assume that we're a little bit of a worse player and we put 1.3% of our lineups in the top 150, which is what just having 2 of these would be, it's just going to take us longer to realize that edge, right? we're going to be theoretically less profitable over the long term. Same thing if we make the assumption that we're winning less of our entry fees back, right? I made some pretty generous assumptions with this original video. If you are winning only 30% of your entry fees back, right, you're going to lose more quickly. You're going to have a higher variance outcome in terms of your ROI. Just since you mentioned it here, right? Like, put it in perspective for average or below average players, how many slates or years you have to be profitable playing this way. I mean, to be completely honest, if you are truly average or below average, you are not ever going to be a profitable player unless you improve, unless you become above average player. Now, I'll say if you are using SaberSim to build your lineups, what you are getting out of the tool is already something that is probably likely to make you at a baseline, probably an average or above average player just using the tools, because the approach to building lineups that are correlated and take into account ownership and are variant correctly in relation to what contest you're playing, right, is so far beyond what maybe the average player is doing that you are likely to be in that category to begin with. But I did find it interesting here, just looking at this, right? Just to put in perspective, how many slates would it take for an average player or a below average player to become profitable, assuming that they did not get any better? You would never get there. The more and more slates would actually just give you more and more opportunity to realize your loss in that case. So anyway, I mean, coming back to this, right? Like, yeah, in the original video, I think I make some assumptions here that are very generous to the player to come up with this video, right? 2% of your lineups in the top 1% is exceptional. That's better than I'm doing in NFL or NBA this season. And winning back half of your entry fees on any given night is also exceptional. And then doing this consistently every single slate. These are all very generous assumptions. And if you're interested to see, even with those generous assumptions, how this plays out every time we simulate this, right? How much variance there is, I would go back and watch the original video here. But if we remove some of the generous assumptions and get rid of an entire column of lineups, or if we lower this column, right, it is only going to get harder to realize your edge. So that would be my answer there. But let me know if that helps. If you have any follow-up questions. Yeah. So. All right, cool. Let's see. Let's jump back over to Slack and let's pull the app back up. All right, cool. It's a question from Laddie. Can you explain how you calculate optimal score for a given NBA player? If hitting value is 5x is optimal / goal score 6x plus. I've seen some other analytics guys quantify this as 5x plus 10. Or could we easily call the 75th percentile the goal / optimal, with 99th percentile obviously being max ceiling score, which I'm not referring to? Yeah, this idea of target scores is kind of interesting. You definitely hear this pretty often. Let's switch back over to NBA. I think for a long time, what was defined as like a target score was 5x or 6x, or hitting value, right? Has kind of always been defined as like hitting 5x roughly. I think the problem with that, and what has always really been the problem with that, is that it overvalues low salary guys, right? If we imagine the difference in terms of what it actually does for your lineup, having a player like Jokic score 5x versus having a min salary player score 5x, right? A 3,000 salary player going 5x only gives you 15 points. And that player's opportunity cost of being in the lineup and just scoring 15 points probably already puts that lineup out of contention for actually winning, right? So then you have this idea of creating these like linear add-ons to creating value, right? So a player, we're not looking for 6x from a player, we're looking for 5x plus 10 points, right? And what that does is that it asks more of low salary players, right? And less of higher salary players in determining target scores. The problem overall, I think at the end of the day, no matter how you slice it, is that I think target scores in general are just a little bit outdated. I think they're outdated for a few reasons. One is that it doesn't really take into account the context of the slate, right? Like, it's not enough to say you need 400, 350 points to win a DraftKings NBA GBP, right? It's going to depend a lot on the ownership of players, how well the chalk does, how many games are on the slate, and also what contest you are individually playing. So saying that you're looking for Nikola Jokic to go 5x plus 10, no matter what the context of the slate is overall, I think doesn't actually just end up helping you very much. I don't think it actually ends up doing anything very meaningful in determining what you need overall to succeed that night. So I think, even though, and I think part of what happens here too, and something that like I'm aware of, is that I think at times sim variance can feel a little bit black boxy, right? Like, even if you have a strong sense of what sim variance is doing, you don't see it super visibly in the build, right? You don't actually see individually. Like, one thing that I've thought could be helpful here, and maybe it's something we can do in the future, is actually showing like what points did these players actually score in the individual sims that is represented by the lineup I'm looking at, right? Like, if you build a lineup for a 20 max, right? If you build a lineup for a 20 max at sim variant 6 and build these, right? I think it would be helpful in visualizing why thinking about target scores isn't so necessary when you're using SaberSim. If you could see, Giannis scored 72 points in this set of sims on average, and that's why he's in the lineup. And this lineup in this set of individual game skips scored 378 points, even if there was some variance and diversity in who had what percentile outcome. So put another way, or flipping this around, I think a lot of times thinking about things in target scores or what you need from a certain player is a tool that you have to use if you don't have the opportunity to sample that player's real range of outcomes like we can do here. But that's where it comes from overall. That's where it comes from, and that's why hitting value or optimal goal scores have transformed into these like 5x plus 10 calculations. So the other thing too, like thinking, so the second point of this was percentiles, right? Like, even thinking about a target score for a player being their 75th percentile outcome, I think it is better, right? And you'll actually see that using like a 75th percentile outcome actually solves some of the problems of a 6x multiplier, right? Because you are then asking more of low salary players relative to their salary to hit there. I think that helps. The problem is that winning lineups don't actually end up looking like all 8 players hitting a 75th percentile outcome. That's not representative of what actually happens in a lineup. So let me know if I was able to kind of get at what you're asking there, Laddie. I'm not totally sure, mostly just because we don't even, like, this calculation isn't even, like, we don't do target scores. So if there's something I'm kind of missing here, let me know. But good question. Brandon says, I think it's just harder to see the big picture when weeks after weeks of not seeing a profit makes you wonder if your process is good or not. Yeah, I mean, I think like the lesson here overall, I guess we could just do this for a couple here. Let's see. Here's what we'll do. Let's go ahead. We'll just zero out column 3. And we'll change this to I see. Let's do this. Let's say that lineup 3 always places 500th place. So there we go. And then let's say instead of winning 500 back every night, we win back 50, which is a little less generous, right? Like, what you're going to see here is that the results just become a little bit less right? It's going to be, you're going to have more losing sets, right? It takes more to get there, but you still have the potential for these huge outcomes, right? So this, in this case, Brandon, is basically exactly what you asked me to do, which is to assume that you get 2 lineups in the top 1% instead of 3, and to assume you're only winning $50 back instead of your 75, right? I mean, this is still a profitable player with these metrics. It's just going to take longer to get there. And you're going to have more variance in what this simulation ends up being, right? We can see we have a minus 14 after 100 slates, right? That would potentially be 5+ NFL seasons. You could still be negative. There's a small positive win, right? There's $8,500 with this particular example here. So for those of you that have no idea what's going on, again, in case you tuned in late here, this is kind of a follow-up to a video I did here 3 months ago now, where I simulated out 100 slates and showed basically how much variance there is even for a winning player in your outcomes for 100 slates. What we're doing here now is we're assuming that this player is even closer to average than I originally did. So we're making an assumption that this player only places 2 lineups of 150 in the top 1% every time they play, and they win back less here than 75, right? And all of this is intended to show how much variance, how much kind of just pure randomness there is, even in a 100 slate sample, in terms of what you end up leaving with these assumptions. So, but also, Brandon, I'd be happy to give you a copy of this as well. Actually, I see this was somebody's copy that I have since now kind of messed up. So sorry, Sean. I can't even remember necessarily who asked for this. But I'd be happy to make you a copy if you want to play with this too and see what happens when you change some of these inputs. I'd be happy to do that. So, Ryan asked a good question here about Yahoo contest selection, and he said, NBA, how big do you think the prize pool needs to be to consider maxing a contest out? The contests are pretty small right now for NBA, so you're representing more than 0.01% of the entries if you try to max a contest. I wouldn't want to max the $200 to $300 to first, but maybe the $5K to $10K to first. Thanks. So I haven't done the math to validate this necessarily. This is just something that players that are sharper than I am have told me, and I now follow. I don't want to represent more than 1% of the entries total in the contest, regardless of prize pool. So if we go over to Yahoo, right? Let's go to Yahoo and look at this. And this is just the rule of thumb that I use for, so I'm playing this. First of all, if you haven't entered this already, you've got how much time left? 400 entries left of space in this contest. But this 12 days of winning thing, it's a $1 single entry. It's low stakes, but it's literally free money. So I'd recommend playing it. But if we go to NBA here, right? Like, I don't want to make up more than, I said 1% of the entries, right? So, for example, in this $3, right? Actually, is there a good example? Actually, no, $7 is a good example, right? So this $7 is a 24 max, but I personally would not play more than 8 entries in this, because at that point, I think you start to compete with yourself a little bit. So that's my rule of thumb. It doesn't have to do anything with the prize pool or the prize to first. I don't want to make up more than 1% total of the entries in the contest. So it generally won't matter for anything that is bigger than 1,500 entries, right? Because most of their 1,500 entry plus contests are going to be, oh, yeah, never mind. So some of these contests, this is only a 57 max, even though it's a 1,900 person contest. But yeah. Huh. I confused myself for a second there. Am I thinking about that the wrong way? Am I calculating that the wrong way? Like, am I being crazy here? Oh, yeah, I'm being crazy here. Yeah, I don't want... Wait a minute. I've totally gone and confused myself here. Hang on. Let me think about this. Yeah, no. Okay, no. I'm going crazy here. I don't want to be more than 1% of the entries in the contest. So, for example, I said the wrong thing by saying 1,500, right? For example, for this $1, right, I don't want to play more than probably 34 entries into this contest. More than 19 entries in this contest, more than 8 in this particular contest, regardless of what the entry limits are, because otherwise I feel like I'm competing with myself. So, sorry about that. Mixed myself all up in my head there, but cool. Okay, so we have one other question here. This came in through support over the weekend. And let me go ahead and grab this. And this is from Jason here. So let me go ahead. Let's talk about this here. All right. So Jason said, I'm still fairly new to DFS, just became legal in Louisiana about 2 months ago. Congratulations. I play about $20 to $30 at a time, mostly DK. I like to do the single entry and 3 max entries. I figure better odds. I've done a lot of research and YouTube videos. It's really fun, makes the game so much more fun and enjoyable. Just started realizing the biggest unique is how to win. That's my biggest question, how to get unique and different to try to win money, not after millions, but a few hundred here or there would make me happy. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good observation, especially if you're playing like things like NFL Showdown or single game contests where it is much more likely for you to be duplicated in general. Getting duplicated, having somebody else in the contest that is playing your same lineup is a very, very good way to lower the profitability of that lineup. I will say, in the interest of getting unique, one of the best things that you can do overall to get unique and get try to appropriately be unique for the contest you're playing is building lineups using SaberSim. And the main reason why is because our approach to building lineups is so much different than any other site that's out there. So a traditional optimizer, almost any other tool that is on the market, is just going to optimize your lineup by the average projection, right? It's going to pack in as much of this number as it can while staying under the salary cap. And what we do that is different is we have thousands of play-by-play game simulations for every single game on the slate. And depending on what contest you tell us you're playing, so if you're playing single entry, right, we will sample those game simulations in different sized buckets to kind of randomly survey a player's range of outcomes of what their possible outcomes are. And when you build lineups, you're going to get lineups that are somewhat unique to you and are unlikely to be duplicated by anybody else, even using SaberSim, because your random sample of game sims are going to be different than anybody else's. So in that vein, it's very likely that you just build pretty unique lineups for your contest by the nature of how the lineups are optimized. If you are playing something like NFL Showdown, like the Monday Night Football Showdown tonight, right, there are definitely things you can do to further reduce your chance of being duplicated and build a unique lineup. One of the things that I like to do the most is to adjust the maximum salary and bring this down. You see, by default, we actually bring it down 100. Depending on the contest I'm playing, I often like to bring this down to even like 49.5. A disproportionate number of lineups for NFL Showdown are built somewhere between 49.6 and max salary on DraftKings, for example, compared to how often those lineups win. Especially people that are optimizing using traditional tools or hand building lineups. They are generally led in the direction of maximizing salary, right? And those lineups don't actually tend to win all that much more often compared to other lineups at lower salary ranges. So I like to drop this down. I recommend also keeping your ownership fade slider a little bit turned up for these, depending on what you're playing, right? If you're just playing the single entries, you might not need to. But I recommend at least exploring keeping your ownership fade a little bit higher. And then if we go ahead and build some lineups, one other thing you can do, that used 49.9. That's okay. One other thing you can do in the interest of trying to be unique, especially for NFL Showdown, is particularly go through, and if you're only building 1 to 3 lineups, like it sounds like you are here, you can go through and kind of particularly look for lineups that are unlikely to be played by somebody else. And One of the best ways you can do that is look for combinations of players that are either a little strange, or just maybe not what you might have expected somebody to do. Let me see if we can find one here that kind of highlights what I'm talking about. Let's see. Here, I'll just do this. One thing that I always like to do is look for, is anybody playing Chase Edmonds and James Conner together, right? Probably an unlikely pairing. Now, there are game simulations where those two players are optimal together. That's why they're showing up here. So we can check some of these lineups in and look at some of these lineups, right? Another one is a quarterback captain with the defense on the opposing side. Those players are negatively correlated, right? When one player succeeds, the other one is less likely to succeed on average. But in an individual game sim, anything can happen. And this is a lineup that makes you far more unique. So in summary, right, the approach that we use to building these lineups, since it uses the game simulations, is already much more likely to help you build a unique lineup compared to almost any other tool that's out there. Lowering your max salary in the build settings, especially for a showdown. I wouldn't do this for main slates most of the time, but for showdown, I think lowering your max salary can help you build some more unique lineups. And if you're only playing 1, 2, 3 couple lineups that you can kind of afford to spend the time going through and hand picking your lineup, looking for combinations of players that the field might be unlikely to play because of the players that are used in the lineup here is a great approach overall as well. So there's a lot of different, really, you can almost pick any player here and literally just go look and see who are they negatively correlated to and use that combination of players, right? Even though it sounds a little counterintuitive, why would I want to use negatively correlated players in Showdown? Well, the field is much less likely to use those combinations of players together compared to how likely that lineup is to be the optimal. So that's basically why. But all right. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. We are right at about the hour mark. Congratulations again to all of our winners of the Weekly Max Challenge this week, both our top 2 scorers and our giveaway winners. Make sure you guys all get an email before the end of the day letting you know you won, when to expect your prizes, etc. Thank you to everybody that tuned in today for the stream, asked questions, participated. Good luck on tonight's 9-game NBA slate. I think there was a hockey showdown that then got postponed, but there is, of course, Monday Night Football NFL showdown as well, so good luck on that. We will be right back here again tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. So in the meantime, take care, good luck tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow. See ya.